Hello and welcome to the Blend podcast. I'm Mike Ruff. In 2023, nearly 98% of independent garage revenue came from ICE vehicles, according to Garage Industry Trends data. And with nearly two-thirds of this work coming from diesel, a decline in diesel could mean a significant loss for workshops. Sharing some insight ahead of his talk at the Blend 2024, Andy Crook is joining us in this episode to offer his thoughts on what garages should be doing to replace that diesel work and how to go about making those strategic business decisions in these changing times. Andy, welcome back onto the Blend podcast.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
In the last episode, we covered electric vehicles. We had a look at the sales data of EVs on our roads and considered the future impact of the zero emissions mandate. So I thought it's a good idea to get started today with your view on this, Andy, because I gather that you're somewhat dubious on the EV data that's being fed to us from the media.
I believe there's a deliberate bias and a manipulation of the data as it's presented to us. Via the mainstream media and the non-mainstream media. And I call these people, what I call them is agents for change. And they have an agenda for whatever reason. And I believe one of the things that I believe that's happening at the moment, which is quite interesting, is I believe, and the data supports me on this, is that we're overestimating the impact of electric vehicles for independent garages. When I mean impact, I mean how many of them are actually in a normal independent. Government policies for passenger vehicles are all aimed at zero emissions at the tailpipe, which doesn't make it a zero emission vehicle. And then that prevents other technologies from competing in this space. So all of that combined makes it feel like there's a huge inevitability that we're going to be sort of overrun with electric vehicles in the near future, when the truth is slightly different. I think it's closer to 85% of vehicles sold in 2023 had an engine. That puts a slightly different spin on what we normally hear. And these are the data and the facts I'm going to look at the Blend, and then asking the question, so where should your training and your focus be now? I'm not saying EVs are not going to be part of the future car park. They're very much going to be, and I welcome them for reasons of air quality, if nothing else. But right now, as an independent garage, your focus, they should be on the horizon. You should be thinking about them. You could have some of the techs trained in readiness, because you are going to see them. However, a battery electric vehicle is probably not going to be the most common thing you're going to see in the next 5 years. It will feature, but it's not going to be the most common. And you probably want to hone your skills on probably petrol direct injection vehicles and getting better and better at diagnosing those. So to add a little bit of context to that number is, I believe in 2023, I haven't got the data in front of me, but in 2023, more than half the vehicles sold had some form of additional battery. So there was a degree, and depending on what vehicles they are, of additional electrification from micro all the way up to mild and then plug-in hybrids. But they still have an engine. So I believe that having training on those systems is important. That's only half the vehicles, so more, and like I said, I think it's something like 85% had an engine still sold last year, plus all the others that do in the car park. So that message I don't think is out there, and I don't think it's just not, I suppose, sexy, and it doesn't help tool manufacturers sell more tools, does it? There's more of what we used to than you think is kind of the message. And therefore, when you're thinking about, you're planning your business going ahead, you ought to be planning for what is actually there as opposed to what we perceive is happening. And I think that's a big part of the message.
That's an interesting point. It's easy to get swayed by those headline figures, and you're not saying that the number of EVs on our roads isn't going to increase, because They are. It seems to me that your point is to look at the data in a more local level in your area and in your garage.
If you like, the technology readiness a garage needs depends on its market and its marketing and the customers it wants to attract. And therefore, it should prepare accordingly. But to put those numbers in perspective, there were 2 million cars sold last year. 200,000 were electric, fully electric, 16% approximately. Yeah, so it's how the data is presented to us makes us feel or perceive the information differently, and that's one of the things I want to talk about at the blend, and sort of make sure people don't take how the data is presented to them, what I call manipulation of the data, at face value, to look at the numbers, to start looking at their own business and the numbers in their own business, and not rely on everybody else and make decisions based on the data that they have about their business, backed up by data from other sources, reliable sources, may I add.
What about diesel?
Since 2016 and the Dieselgate scandal, many manufacturers have kind of stopped developing that technology because the demand simply just dropped. And I feel that's a good thing, because if we're being duped by them on the actual emissions and how they may affect the health of people, especially in cities, then we ought to, ditch a technology that isn't suitable for the population, if that's the right way of putting it. But I'm sure there are plenty of technicians and garages out there that haven't had up-to-date diesel training. So even though there hasn't been a lot of technological advancement in the diesel engine as we know and love it, the technology readiness of the garages is probably below that level anyway. So there's plenty of courses out there for AdBlue training, and more recently Common Rail stuff, DPF fixes. There's still a huge opportunity to do that work and do that work effectively and keep those after engine exhaust treatments on the vehicles, because there is sadly a growing industry of removing emissions devices from diesel engines. Have a message out there that you are not removing these systems, you are fixing them, because from nothing, apart from it's the right thing to do to leave these systems on the vehicles, for the garage and for the customer, because all it takes is a stroke of the pen at Whitehall. We change how the MOT test is done. We start looking at particulate matter as a part of the MOT test, and that favour we did that customer is now a disservice when that vehicle is no longer roadworthy, and will probably cost more than the value of the vehicle to make it roadworthy. You could argue that as there's less and less diesel vehicles, this could be a waste of time, and I would say in 5 years' time that's probably going to be right. Between now and then, I think focusing or having a focus on these repairs is probably still very, very worthwhile. The problem comes is if you become a diesel specialist, then I would say that was probably not wise.
Diesels are in decline. I think that's now clear. So what's the impact of this decline for workshops?
Well, loss of income, loss of revenue. Looking at the trends data, the average diesel invoice is much greater than the average petrol invoice, and certainly for the average garage, much, much greater, about 57% higher when I last looked at the data, although it changes pretty much every time it's produced, and it's an absolutely fantastic resource, is more than like an EV, a typical EV, because they have less complicated systems on them. They are simpler. Now, as they age and as that second-hand car park starts to trickle into the independent sector, we may see the average EV invoice increase over time. But at the moment, it's I think the last time I looked, about 57% less than the average diesel invoice. So that gives you an idea of the opportunity that could be lost if you don't keep up to date. And I think it's 37% last time I looked, higher than a petrol or hybrid invoice. They're very similar.
What should garages be replacing that profitable diesel work with?
If you want to replace that diesel work with something else, what that something else is shouldn't be the thing the garage owner prefers, which is obviously an easy trap to fall into. But you should be looking at your customers' needs and wants. And customer wants is what you satisfy by identifying the customer need. So, for example, Matt, in the previous podcast, talked about EVs coming up for MOT. One of the major failure things, and once again, you can see this in industry trends, is tyres for EVs, because they're heavier and they have more tyre wear. So could you be, if you don't do tyres now and you're an MOT station, could that be an area you look at? Think about, doesn't matter what the fuel is for the vehicle, think about the things that vehicle, every vehicle still has, and start looking at becoming the centre of excellence for those things in your area, because every vehicle has brakes and tyres. So there's a spoiler alert. There's something to think about if you haven't got world class in your area, or certainly leading in your area facilities for that, because all cars have them. Suspension work, these are the areas that are common to all technology, all fuel technologies, which you could probably start to make a bigger splash about in your area. And then doesn't matter what technology prevails in the end, you're still in a good position, because until we start flying around in our cars, we'll need wheels, tyres and brakes and suspension.
Are we right to categorise these vehicles by powertrain? I mean, we're talking about workshops that repair vehicles, so it shouldn't really matter if they're powered by petrol, if they're powered by diesel, or going back a few years, LPG, and now increasingly hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, and possibly at some point in the near future, perhaps, hydrogen vehicles. Is that powertrain discussion too much of a distraction?
That identification of the different skills and the different technologies is still important, but I don't think customers see it the same way. They still call it a car, no matter whether they put petrol, diesel, or electricity in it. It's a car, isn't it? And where does a car go to be fixed? The garage. I think that might be a message that's worth thinking about. Although you may find that somebody wants a specialist for whatever reason, that would very much determine the direction that business went in. So although it's still a car, it might have a different badge on the front, and someone might be looking for someone who specialises in that badge. Someone else might decide they want to specialise in the type of fuel they put in it and look for a specialist in that area. And I always say specialists attract more money than generalists, but I think there is a danger of having too many specialists, and then it dilutes, if you like, the product. So yeah, you can't have more than 2 or 3 specialists, can you, in any sort of one geographical area. I was going to say town, but even in a big city, you can have, I remember it was quite popular to become a VW or VAG group specialist not that long ago, because the access to a reasonable level of the technology was made so easy by particular diagnostic tools that were on the market, and the fact that their parts supplier broke away from having to go to the dealership when they set up trade part supplies. So that model quickly became diluted, becoming a VAG specialist became harder and harder as more and more people did it. So it'll be the same with any of the technologies. So is that necessarily a route to go down? It could be, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. However, if you're going to be a diesel specialist now, you've got to understand that the number of diesel cars is dwindling. However, the diesel cars that are out there, until something changes, will remain there, and they may get older and older, and therefore the repairs may get higher and higher in terms of the value to a garage, until the point where they become uneconomical. So it's a balance, and I think you've got to look at the data and the data will change month on month, year on year, until we get to the point where there is some sort of saturation of the different technologies, whatever they may be, because we can't accurately predict exactly what will happen. However, there are data sources out there, which is the focus of my talk, that are reliable, that are doing those predictions for us.
Any thoughts on timescales when it comes to the decline of diesel?
I've called them 3 zones in my talks. I call it the ostrich zone, where we just bury our heads in the sand, effectively, because it just seems like business as usual. And then 5 years, I'm calling it the pinch zone, where we start to notice. And then 10 years' time, I'm calling it the hippo zone, which is when only the strong survive, effectively. I don't know if you know the hippo story. It's quite amusing, and it's been covered many times in various documentaries when they look at during periods of drought, how hippos all end up in one pool, and only the biggest survive, and they actually eat each other. Interestingly enough, it's the water, the hippos, and the mud. The reason hippos wallow in mud is because they get terrible sunburn. So they roll around in mud, and the mud protects their skin. So it's not just water to drink; it's water and mud to survive, and they all end up all in the same watering hole. And eventually, only the biggest and the strongest survive. And effectively, that's why I call it the hippo zone, because if you do nothing, you could be losing out a significant part of your income. In 10 years, if you do nothing, you could be missing something like 35 to 37% of your income, based on the fact that the average diesel invoice is 30% higher, and that's and that is a big if you still work on the same number of cars. So you get a picture of the scale of the problem if you do nothing.
We're often talking about opportunities on this podcast, so what's your advice, Andy, on how to choose the right opportunity for your business?
This could easily become a doom and gloom story, but I don't think it is. There are opportunities for forward-thinking garages, but you've got to have a plan and a strategy to deal with it. So the early stage is having the relevant training and the relevant technologies. That's not excluding electrification, because we know 55% of the cars sold last year had some form of additional electrification. So we've got to keep an eye on that. But it shouldn't. I believe it shouldn't be our major focus. Yes, we need trained technicians, and there'll be a limited time in which to get trained in EV. And once it becomes, if it ever becomes the dominant fuel source, then there might be a sudden rush, and you might not get the training you need. But at the same time, if you do your training now on today's technology, and it takes 8 or 9 years to become mainstream, the training you have now will not be as relevant in that time. So it's looking at your own business, looking at the data from your own business, comparing it to the national averages, and looking where you sit, and doing the right thing at the right time for your business, based on facts and reliable data, not what your mate said down the pub, or relying on the data as it's presented by, as I call them, the agents for change, that would like you to believe otherwise. So it's having strategy. So what I'd like to do at the Blend is explain the methodology that I've used for the figures that I've come up with. How then a garage could use a similar, it's very, very simple methodology based on their data, and compare it to national averages to see where they sit. Not all areas of the country will have as many EVs as others, because it depends on many, many things. The geography of your region, the social economic status of your region, these things all come into play. So you've got to look at your own data first, and then apply that methodology that's very simple to your business, and make decisions and come up with strategies based on how you see it happening around you. And then I hear a lot of sort of feedback I get is, the dealer has all the advantage when it comes to the diesel demise. But they don't, I don't believe. I think smaller independent garages have more agility. They can choose what they do and what they work on. Dealers can't. we have, as independents, freedom that they don't have. And I think we have the ability to pivot quicker. So there's another thing. But it's also about diversification. And you've got to do the right thing for you. Now, it might be that you're planning not to have a business in 5 or 8 years' time, and you might be an absolutely fantastic diesel specialist right now. Happy days. If that's your plan, if that's you're planning to finish, and your association with the garage, your planned end is to close and maximise as much profit between now and then, that might be a great route to go down. Because remember, most people won't be thinking that way. And how to stand out when everyone's running, walk. If everyone's shouting, whisper. And this could be one of those that could be, as long as it suits the business ends and the business aims. Use the data, make sure you're using reliable data, but make sure you're using your data and not someone else's to make the decisions about your business. It's your responsibility. The success of your business rides on your shoulders, and that's it. I think when I'm speaking to people, about the future, people, it's easy to become downhearted and believe that maybe the future isn't as bright, but I do believe it is. But you have to do something about it. If you don't do anything about it, remember the hippo zone. It's you have to do something. It's not going to happen on its own.
Andy, you're a confirmed speaker for the Blend 2024, and you've planted some nice teasers throughout our chat today. So tell us more about what we can expect to hear from you this year.
Yeah, sure. So I'm talking about how the demise of diesel vehicles will impact the independent workshop. What I want to do at the Blend is I want to sort of do a much deeper dive into the data, how information is presented to garages, and how then they may perceive the current situation against the reality. And then I want to share with the audience the methodology that I use to get the results, so they can use it within their own businesses. That's the sort of the synopsis, if you like, the brief look at what I'm trying to do. It'll go down, I'm sure, many different avenues, as these things usually do.
And before we finish, what's your message to anyone listening that's yet to book their tickets for the Blend 2024?
I think firstly, it's a great social event to mix with other garage owners who are all going through and all have similar problems, issues as you, and if nothing else, to have a chat with some of these people. And they don't think it's only for the bigger, better garages. It's open to everyone, and I would suggest if you're thinking about your business and you run an independent automotive business, this is probably the premier event for independent garage business owners to attend, in terms of the networking that you could do, which is probably the most important aspect of the blend, is to speak to other garage business owners, get a feel for what they're doing. And if you have any aspirations to be slightly better in how you run your business, just speaking to other people will inspire you. There's a famous saying, your network is your net worth. Hang around with better people, you will become a better person. And it's the same in business. Hang around, rub shoulders with the bigger and better businesses. If that's how you see them, you will end up with a bigger and better business. So that would be the premier reason I would buy a ticket, is to be in that environment where you're talking to other independent garage owners about your business, about what you finding tough, what they're finding tough, their solutions, your solutions. Share the knowledge in a networking event. Don't go there and sit in the corner nursing a warm pint of beer. You won't get anything from it. Get there, get chatting, go and seek out the people you've heard of and speak to them. It is one of the most friendly events, especially get there early on a Friday and get chatting in the bar. That was a real eye-opener for me last year when I saw how connected everybody was. That would be the first reason. The second reason is you may learn something. There's some absolutely industry-leading experts speak at the blend. It's getting bigger and better every year in terms of that. and some of the subjects I find fascinating. And everyone can learn something of someone else, and that's a more formalised way of doing it. But I would say the networking is probably a better way of doing it, in my opinion.
Thanks, Andy. We're very much looking forward to seeing you there.
Thank you very much. It'll be a pleasure to be there.
The Blend 2024 takes place at Birmingham's Eastside Rooms on Saturday the 28th of September. If you're yet to get your tickets, you have until the end of June to take advantage of the early bird ticket prices. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Blend podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to it in your usual podcast player so you never miss an episode. And if you know someone who would find this podcast useful, be sure to share it with them. Until next time, bye for now.